Good evening. Welcome to this Franciscan Beat News Brief. I'm Thomas Pear Manley. Mary is away. As we come on the air tonight, the Supreme Court is taking up a dispute over a blocked Biden administration policy that would prioritize deportation of people in the country illegally who pose the greatest public safety risk. Republican-led states sued and won a nationwide court order that is meant to limit immigration officers' discretion in deciding whom to deport. At the center of the legal fight is a September 2021 directive from the Department of Homeland Security that paused deportation unless individuals had committed acts of terrorism, espionage, or, quote, egregious threats to public safety. An uneasy calm is hanging over Kyiv as residents of the Ukrainian capital do what they can to prepare for further expected Russian missile attacks as winter sets in. To ease that burden, NATO allies made plans today to boost provisions of blankets, generators, and other basic necessities to ensure Ukrainians can maintain their resolve in this 10th month of fighting. Targeted Russian missile strikes since early October have battered Ukraine's power grid in what Western officials describe as a campaign to weaponize the coming winter cold. The country's electricity grid operator says about a third of Ukraine's residents continue to face power supply disruptions. NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg says Ukraine will one day become a member of the world's largest security alliance. It's a commitment that NATO leaders made to Ukraine 14 years ago, but some say it led in part to Russia's invasion. Stoltenberg's remarks came as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his NATO counterparts gathered today in Romania to drum up urgently needed support for Ukraine, including deliveries of electrical components for the country's power grid. Some countries also promised military aid, including artillery and armored vehicles. The latest UK census has found that less than half of people in England and Wales consider themselves to be Christian. It is the first time the country's official religion has been followed by a minority of the population. Figures released today show that 46.2% of the population in England and Wales describe themselves as Christian in the 2021 census, down from 59.3% in 2011. Some 37% said they had no religion, up from 25% in 2011. Secularism campaigners said the shift should trigger a rethink of the way religion is entrenched in British society. Chinese universities are sending students home, and police are fanning out in Beijing and Shanghai to prevent more protests. That comes after crowds angered by severe antivirus restrictions called for President Xi Jinping to resign in the biggest show of public dissent in decades. Authorities have eased some controls after demonstrations in at least 8 mainland cities and Hong Kong. But they showed no sign of backing off their larger zero-COVID strategy that has confined millions of people to their homes for months at a time. Security forces have detained an unknown number of people, including a BBC journalist, and stepped up surveillance. With police out in force, there was no word of protests today in Beijing, Shanghai, or other major mainland cities. A top Qatari official involved in preparing his country's hosting of the World Cup has put the number of worker deaths for the tournament, quote, between 400 and 500 for the first time in history. That's drastically higher than any other number previously offered by Doha. The comment, made by Hassan Al-Tawadi, the Secretary General of Qatar's Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, appeared to come off the cuff during an interview with British journalist Piers Morgan. It also threatened to reinvigorate criticism by human rights groups over what the toll of hosting the Middle East's first World Cup is for the migrant labor force that built over $200 billion worth of stadiums, metro lines, and new infrastructure needed for the tournament. French President Emmanuel Macron will be the guest for the first state visit of Joe Biden's presidency. The visit this week is a revival of diplomatic pageantry that had been put on hold because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Biden-Macron relationship has turned around from its choppy start. Macron briefly recalled France's ambassador to the United States last year after the White House announced a deal to sell nuclear submarines to Australia. That undermined a contract that France had to sell diesel-powered submarines. Today, Macron has become one of Biden's most forward-facing European allies in the Western response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finally tonight, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has visited the James Smith Cree Nation, a community that was devastated by a spree of mass stabbings in September. The visit was delayed by the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II just days after the attacks. In a brief statement after the visit, Trudeau said, quote, "Today I heard firsthand the pain, sorrow, anger, and grief that people here in the community of James Smith Cree Nation are feeling. Miles Sanderson killed 11 people from the 3,500-strong Indigenous community, including his brother Damien. Sanderson himself died in custody after a 3-day manhunt, which placed the provinces of Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba on high alert." That's all for tonight's Franciscan Beat News Brief. In for Mary Horton, I'm Thomas Pear Manley. Good night, and God bless.